The radio crackles. A voice, sharp, authoritative, speaking accented English, fills the bridge of a United States Navy warship cutting through the South China Sea. U.S. Warship, you are entering Chinese territorial waters. Turn back immediately or face the consequences. The captain of the vessel does not reach for the radio. He does not slow the engines. He does not consult a politician. He looks at his navigation officer, who confirms what they already know. They are in international waters. They have every legal right to be here. And the United States Navy does not turn back. What happens in the next several hours will send a message, not just to Beijing, but to every nation watching from the shore, to understand why these confrontations happen and why they matter more than almost anything else occurring in today's world. You have to understand a body of water, the South China Sea, roughly 1.4 million square miles of ocean bordered by China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia. Every single year, approximately $3.4 trillion worth of global trade passes through it. 1/3 of the world's maritime shipping, more than half of the world's annual merchant fleet tonnage. It is, without exaggeration, the most economically critical stretch of ocean on the planet, and China wants to own it. Beginning in the 1940s, China drew what it calls the 9-dash line, a sweeping, U-shaped boundary that claims approximately 90% of the South China Sea as sovereign Chinese territory. This claim has no basis in international law. In 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague ruled definitively that China's claims had no legal standing under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the international treaty that governs the world's oceans. China's response was immediate and categorical. They rejected the ruling entirely. They called it null and void. They have never complied with it. Instead, they built. Between 2013 and 2016, China dredged millions of tons of sand from the ocean floor and constructed 7 artificial islands in the Spratly Island chain, uninhabited reefs transformed into military installations complete, with runways capable of handling fighter jets, radar arrays, missile batteries, and deep-water ports. They did it in the open, in international view, daring anyone to stop them. No one did. Emboldened, Beijing deployed its naval forces, its Coast Guard, the largest in the world, and its so-called maritime militia. Fishing vessels crewed not by fishermen, but by trained military personnel, operating as a gray zone force that can harass, block, and intimidate without technically committing an act of war. And into this increasingly hostile environment, the United States Navy sails, deliberately, repeatedly, by design. The program is called Freedom of Navigation Operations. The legal principle is ancient. The high seas belong to everyone. No nation can claim sovereignty over international waters. And if that principle is not actively defended, if the United States simply accepts China's territorial claims by sailing around them, then the claim becomes de facto reality. Law in the absence of enforcement becomes suggestion, so the Navy sails through, every time on purpose, and China responds. March 8, 2009, the USNS Impeccable, an unarmed U.S. Navy surveillance vessel, is operating in international waters approximately 75 miles south of Hainan Island in the South China Sea. Its mission is routine, gathering ocean survey data and monitoring submarine activity in an area of growing strategic importance. The crew of the Impeccable are not combat sailors. The vessel carries no weapons. Under international law, it has every right to be exactly where it is. Then the ships begin to appear. A Chinese Navy intelligence ship moves in close, uncomfortably close. Then 2 Chinese government vessels. Then 2 more fishing trawlers flying Chinese flags. 5 vessels now surround the Impeccable in what can only be described as a coordinated operation. The Chinese crews are not subtle about their intentions. They maneuver directly in front of the Impeccable's bow, forcing the American vessel to make emergency stops to avoid collision. They use signal flags to order the Impeccable to leave the area immediately. And then, in what American officials would later call an unprofessional act, several Chinese sailors strip off their shirts and use grappling hooks to attempt to snag the acoustic sensor equipment. The Impeccable is towing behind it in the water. They are literally trying to steal American intelligence equipment in international waters in broad daylight. The crew of the Impeccable responds with fire hoses, pushing back the closest vessels with high-pressure water jets. The Chinese sailors, soaking wet, put their clothes back on and continue circling. The Impeccable sends an urgent message to command. The USS Chunghoon, a guided missile destroyer, is dispatched as escort. When it arrives, the Chinese vessels withdraw. The confrontation is over. But its implications are just beginning. The Obama administration lodges a formal diplomatic protest. China responds by accusing the United States of illegal espionage. The world watches, takes notes. And China begins planning its next move. October 27, 2015. The USS Lassen, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, one of the most capable surface combatants in the world, sails to within 12 nautical miles of Subai Reef in the Spratly Islands. Subai Reef is one of China's artificial islands. Before China dredged it into existence, it was a submerged reef with no legal territorial sea under international law. The United States' position is legally precise and deliberate. If China's artificial island has no legitimate territorial status, then the 12 nautical mile zone China claims around it has no legal standing either. Sailing through that zone is not a provocation. It is a legal statement. As the Lassen closes within 12 miles, Chinese naval vessels begin shadowing her. The radio warnings begin almost immediately. Chinese naval commanders, speaking formally and precisely, inform the Lassen that it is entering Chinese sovereign waters and must alter course or face defensive measures. The Lassen's commanding officer responds with equal formality. The United States does not recognize China's territorial claims. The vessel is in international waters. It will maintain its course. The tension on the bridge is controlled, but absolute. Every officer knows that a Chinese vessel making a physical move, a collision, a weapons lock, a warning shot, would trigger a response chain that neither side can fully predict. The Lassen sails on, 12 miles, inside the claimed zone, Chinese warships paralleling it on both sides. Then it exits, course maintained throughout, speed steady. In Beijing, the government issues a furious statement, calling the operation illegal provocation and a serious political and military provocation. In Washington, the Pentagon confirms the operation was conducted exactly as planned. In the capitals of Southeast Asia, in Manila, in Hanoi, in Jakarta, governments watch the footage and quietly exhale. Someone, they note, is still willing to defend the rules. September 30th, 2018. The USS Decatur, another Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, is conducting a freedom of navigation operation near Gavin and Johnson Reefs in the Spratly Islands. A Chinese Liang-class destroyer, the Lanzhou, moves to intercept. What happens next crosses a threshold that American naval commanders had hoped never to see. The Lanzhou does not merely shadow the Decatur, it moves aggressively, at speed, on a direct collision course, closing to within 41 yards of the American destroyer, 41 yards. That is roughly the length of a basketball court. Between two warships displacing thousands of tons, moving at significant speed in open ocean. The Decatur's bridge team executes an emergency maneuver to avoid collision, a hard turn that pulls them just clear of catastrophic contact. And in that moment, in that 41-yard gap between two nations' warships, the world comes very close to something no one has yet fully calculated. The U.S. Pacific Fleet Commander issues a statement calling the Chinese maneuver unsafe and unprofessional. Inside the naval community, the assessment is starker. This was not a miscalculation. This was not a nervous junior officer making a mistake. This was a deliberate, calculated act of physical intimidation, designed to test whether the United States would flinch. The Decatur did not flinch, but the nature of these confrontations has now fundamentally changed. China is no longer just issuing radio warnings. China is willing to risk a collision, willing to risk the deaths of sailors to make its point. The gray zone just got significantly darker, while the U.S. Navy confrontations attract the headlines. China's most sustained campaign of maritime intimidation has been directed at a smaller, less equipped adversary, the Philippines, a treaty ally of the United States since 1951. Since 2023, Chinese Coast Guard vessels have repeatedly intercepted Philippine resupply missions to the BRP Sierra Madre, a deliberately grounded Philippine Navy ship at 2nd Thomas Shoal that serves as a sovereign military outpost. The tactics have escalated progressively and deliberately. First came the radio warnings, then came the physical blocking maneuvers. Then came water cannons deployed against Philippine vessels, injuring Filipino sailors. Then came military-grade laser dazzlers aimed at Philippine Coast Guard crews, temporarily blinding personnel. Then, in a moment that was captured on video and seen around the world, Chinese Coast Guard personnel board Philippine rubber dinghies, seize supplies, and confiscate equipment, including legally held firearms. This is not a gray zone incident. Under international law, this borders on piracy. Washington watches these incidents with a calculation that is both strategic and deeply uncomfortable. The U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty obligates the United States to respond if Philippine armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft are attacked in the Pacific. The Philippine Coast Guard qualifies. The question being asked in every security meeting in Washington, Manila, and Beijing is the same. Has China already crossed the treaty threshold? And if it crosses it more explicitly, what happens next? In response, the U.S. Navy begins conducting joint patrols with the Philippine Coast Guard in contested waters. American warships position themselves within visual range of the most contested zones. The message is direct. You are not dealing with the Philippines alone. Behind every one of these confrontations is a technological competition of extraordinary intensity. China's People's Liberation Army Navy has undergone the most rapid naval expansion in modern history. In 2000, the plan operated aging Soviet-era vessels with limited blue water capability. Today, it is the largest navy in the world by number of hulls, over 370 ships and submarines, with ambitions that stretch far beyond the South China Sea. China's Type 55 destroyer is one of the most capable surface combatants ever built, arguably rivaling the U.S. Navy's Arleigh Burke class in raw capability. Its DF-21D and DF-26 ballistic missiles, specifically designed to strike moving aircraft carriers at ranges of up to 2,500 miles, have fundamentally altered Pacific strategic calculus. They are called, without irony, carrier killers. China's submarine fleet is expanding rapidly. Its nuclear ballistic missile submarines now conduct regular patrols with submarine-launched nuclear weapons, capable of reaching the continental United States. But the United States Navy retains advantages that numbers alone cannot capture. 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, China has 3, and they are still mastering carrier aviation. A submarine force of unmatched quietness and lethality, decades of real operational experience in every ocean on Earth, and above all, alliances. Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force, the Royal Australian Navy, the South Korean Navy, the Philippine military, the United Kingdom's carrier strike group operating in the Pacific. China fights alone. The United States fights with a network of partners that collectively represent the most powerful naval coalition in human history. That is the context in which every one of these confrontations occurs, and that is why every time China challenges a U.S. Navy ship and that ship does not back down, the entire alliance architecture holds. The consequences of these confrontations extend far beyond the individual incidents. Every freedom of navigation operation completed, every radio warning ignored, every aggressive intercept met with steady nerves and maintained course. Each one contributes to a cumulative strategic message that is heard in every foreign ministry and naval headquarters across the Indo-Pacific. The United States will not be moved, and that message matters enormously to America's allies. Taiwan, which China claims as its own territory and has repeatedly threatened to take by force, watches every U.S. Navy transit of the Taiwan Strait with a calculation that goes far beyond the nautical. if America backs down in the South China Sea, if the freedom of navigation operations stop, if the destroyers start sailing around China's claimed zones rather than through them, what does that mean for the credibility of American security guarantees to Taipei? Japan, which has its own territorial disputes with China in the East China Sea over the Senkaku Islands, asks the same question. The Philippines, having watched Chinese forces attack its own Coast Guard personnel with water cannons and lasers, needs to know whether the Mutual Defense Treaty means anything in practice. The incidents have also produced measurable changes in Chinese behavior, though not the ones Beijing intended. Every aggressive Chinese intercept has accelerated the very alliance building that China most fears. AUKUS, the security partnership between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, which will provide Australia with nuclear-powered submarines, was significantly accelerated by the pattern of Chinese maritime aggression. The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, the Quad, between the United States, Japan, Australia, and India, has been elevated from a low-key forum to a major strategic architecture, driven largely by shared concern about Chinese maritime behavior. The Philippines, which had previously pursued a policy of accommodating China under President Duterte, reversed course dramatically under President Marcos, restoring and expanding U.S. basing access, including to 4 new military sites directly facing the South China Sea and Taiwan. China's aggression has not intimidated its neighbors into submission. It has pushed them into America's arms. That is a strategic miscalculation of historic proportions, and yet the danger is far from resolved. The incidents are becoming more frequent. The tactics are becoming more aggressive. In February 2023, a Chinese naval vessel directed a military-grade fire control radar, the system used to target and shoot weapons, at an Australian Navy helicopter conducting routine operations. This is not a warning. This is a weapons lock. It is, under the laws of armed conflict, an act that the targeted nation has every legal right to respond to with lethal force. Australia did not. The incident was protested diplomatically, but the trajectory is clear. Each incident tests the boundary. Each boundary, once tested without consequence, becomes the new baseline. And the next boundary is tested. There is an old principle in naval strategy, articulated long before aircraft carriers or guided missiles existed. Alfred Thayer Mahan, the American naval theorist whose work shaped the navies of the 20th century, wrote that sea power is not merely about fighting battles. It is about controlling the conditions under which battles either happen or do not happen. The United States Navy sailing through the South China Sea is not looking for a fight. It is controlling the conditions. It is saying, with the presence of steel and sailors and the weight of a 2-century naval tradition, these waters are open. They belong to everyone. And the rules that say so will be enforced, not by words, but by ships that do not change course. China's challenge to that principle is real, sustained, and growing. It is backed by the largest naval buildup in modern history, by artificial islands that serve as unsinkable aircraft carriers, by a government that has staked enormous domestic political credibility on the claim that the South China Sea is Chinese. The men and women on the bridges of those U.S. Navy destroyers know this. They know that every time they hold their course, they are carrying something heavier than their orders. They are carrying the credibility of every alliance the United States has ever made, every treaty, every security guarantee ever given to a smaller nation that cannot defend itself alone. That is not an abstract concept when you are 41 yards from a Chinese destroyer closing at speed. That is the weight that a captain carries in a moment of complete silence on the bridge, when every officer is looking at them, waiting, and the ship does not turn. History is made not only in the great declared battles that fill the textbooks. It is made in the quiet moments on open water, when someone decides that the rules matter. When someone decides that backing down is not an option, when a ship holds its course, and the world watching from the shore takes note.